Hey, everybody, this is the Think Global podcast, and this is the month of June. And John, we're back. June is actually always a beautiful month here in Colorado.
I do love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been beautiful so far.
Yeah, typically we get a lot of rain in April and May. Things are green in June. And then it gets hot like it's going to get this weekend in the upper 90s,
Yeah.
and it gets brown.
Everything starts to die off.
Yeah. You know, this is a high plains desert out here, and
Yeah.
we don't get a lot of moisture, but when we get moisture, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's green.
Yeah. But
A lovely place to live.
yeah, but we haven't been here much. We're back now, but
Yes.
we've both been gone quite a bit lately. But always fun to be back in Colorado. Summertime in Colorado is my favorite,
Yep.
so I try to limit my travel as much as I can.
Right, yeah. In spite of that we have a trip in
That's true.
2 weeks from
I'm contradicting
right
my own statement because
Yeah.
in 2 weeks we head
now,
out.
to North Africa. And hey, it's going to be fun, John. We're going to be in the country of Tunisia.
Yep.
And then we will be in Morocco. And those are both very lovely places.
Hot this time of year, though.
It's very hot this time of the year. Tunisia, in particular, located on the Mediterranean, a gorgeous place, very picturesque. Morocco as well. And if you folks have not looked a lot of either one of those countries, just do a little Google search on them. There's so many fascinating aspects of those cultures. And maybe that's a little project for parents to sit down with their kids and say, hey, let's discover where these places are, what's made them famous, like olive oil.
Yeah, I think
Things
we've
like
talked about
that.
that a bit on the
Yeah.
podcast at
Yeah.
some point. We had some episodes about that. And
Yeah.
the northernmost point of the continent of Africa is in Tunisia.
Yep.
And that's a beautiful place. Probably the windiest place I've ever been
Right.
is on that northernmost point, standing there on that little cliff
Yep.
edge. And you literally think you're going to get blown right off the edge. Pretty wild.
And historically, the Roman Empire stretched down there, and that's where Carthage is,
Yep.
which is kind of a historical factoid that's a lot of fun to think about.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right, John, what are we doing today? Where are we going with this?
Well, we thought I have a topic in mind.
You have a topic in mind.
Yeah, that we'll talk about.
All
So,
right, good.
and what it came from, I've been thinking. I don't know why I've been thinking about this, but this quote has just been ruminating in my head, and I thought, man, we could really talk about that on the podcast. It really fits our ethos here on the podcast. And so, a lot of people are familiar with Fred Rogers. He revolutionized children's television. Everybody
Yes, he
knows the
did.
name Fred Rogers is a household name, and he has this quote, and I'm not pretending like we don't know this quote. As soon as I start to say it, everybody's going to go like, "Oh, I've heard that before."
Yeah.
But I want to talk about it a little bit. I think the quote will set up our conversation, and then we can talk around it a little bit. So here's the quote. This is from Fred Rogers. When I was a boy and I would see scary things in the news, my mother would say to me, "Look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping."
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
And I love to think that in big and small, and the things that you and I get to be involved in around the world, and our colleagues globally, and their networks of things that they're involved in their own areas, I like to think that we do find those opportunities to be the helpers.
Right.
That when there's a frenzy in the news cycle, or even in a small circumstance that's more localized, it's not just looking for the helpers. But what's encouraging to me is that I think we are the helpers.
Right.
And I think the people that we get to work with around the world are the helpers.
Right.
So I want to talk about that for a minute.
Yeah.
Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah.
What you've seen, experiences, maybe some stories.
Yeah. You know what? Actually, I could add a twist to that.
Yeah.
Like, as you just stated that, looking for helpers is a good thing, because when you look for helpers, like, you can come alongside of them. But I happen to think that maybe what we ought to do a little bit more of is look for the helper inside of us.
Yeah.
Like, we live in a world that's full of challenges. I just got back from a country in Central Asia where, they may make $2 a day, and they live on that. And life is hard. And there are people there doing humanitarian things and helping. But it forces you to ask the question, how can I find the helper myself, right? So there are those things all around us. And as we were chatting about this subject yesterday, one of the texts that came to mind from the Bible comes from the book of Hebrews, and it's chapter 13, and it basically says this: continue to remember those in prison as if you were together with them in prison, and those who are mistreated as if you yourselves were suffering. And I think the principle there is, like, there are people who are hurting. There are people who are facing adversity. There are people who go through challenges, a multitude of challenges in life, whether it be our neighbor or someone in this country or someone around the world. And that admonishment is to, I think what it's saying is, look for the helper in our own heart. And that is, put your feet into their shoes. Try to feel what they feel. Try to experience what they're experiencing, because what that does is elicit the compassion and the mercy in our own lives to be the kind of people who are helpers. So, taking Fred Rogers' comment, look for helpers. There's always a helper. Maybe look for helpers within ourselves as well.
I love that. And we're not only dressed alike today, we're thinking alike today.
Yes.
If you're watching on YouTube, you can see that we accidentally dressed very similar.
That was a definite accident.
If you're listening on Spotify, go find the YouTube and you can laugh along with us that we're dressed alike. Anyway, we're not only just dressed alike, but we are thinking alike. Because I was thinking of this too. The way I put it in my head was, don't just look for the helpers, be the helper.
Yes.
And that's exactly what you're saying.
Right.
And the encouraging part that I mentioned earlier was, I feel like the people we get to work with are those helpers. They are embodying that in real life. And, you mentioned, biblical text from Hebrews. And I think regardless of religious affiliation, most people will respect the point of view and the person of Jesus.
Right.
And you and I happen to respect the person of Jesus more than most. But, I loved his words where he says, I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me. Truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me.
Yeah.
Like, I love that.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're talking about is, as you look around the world and you see people in need, not to just say, well, let's look for the helper.
Right.
But be the helper in that moment.
Yeah, and actually, that's that theme is woven throughout Scripture. Like, I'm reminded of a text in Leviticus where it says, "Leave when you harvest your crops, leave the crops on the edges of the fields, so that the sojourner, the homeless, the traveler, the person who's in need of a meal, has something to feast on." The selfish person would say, "No. That's actually cash in the bank. I'm going to harvest it all." But the very principle of God is to take care of those who are in need. In fact, James, it says, what is true religion? And it's really to care for the orphan and the widow and for those who are in need. And so that's a theme throughout the Bible. And it forces us to confront our selfishness. Like, so much of our worlds as individuals, it's all about me. It's about my life. It's what I've got to do. It's taking care of myself, and I forget about other people.
Yeah. And there's big and small examples of this, it's been more than a decade now, but, there was a significant refugee crisis from Syria and Iraq. It was the Syrian civil war, and then it was the Islamic State kind of wreaking havoc in that part of the world. And though that was not typically our MO, in what we would do organizationally, we saw that crisis. And I remember the response was, we have to do something.
Yeah.
Like, if we had put it in these words, we would have said, we have to step in and be the helpers in this situation. And we did.
Yeah.
And a decade later, still helping. And
exactly.
That's big. And then there were small examples along the way. And I think something I was thinking about as I was processing just this recording, what we're going to talk about was, I think right now in our world, as you look around, there's just like this increased amount of hostility in the world.
Oh, yeah.
In the U.S., we're coming up on an election. Hostility is ratcheting up daily. Hatred, division. I think in a world of increased hostility, kindness takes us a long way. And the kind people in our world right now are the helpers.
Right.
It doesn't have to be this big thing of like, okay, let's go solve the Syrian refugee crisis. It can be a small thing of, I'm just going to be a person that's kind in my little world and my little sphere of influence today with the Starbucks barista or the waiter at the restaurant or my neighbor across the hall or across the street. To be a kind person is being that helper in today's world.
Right. Yeah, it's making a choice that says everything. All these negatives feel very normal. They're almost normalized now.
Yeah.
Which is it shouldn't be.
Right.
And we can be the people who stand out and do something different.
Yeah.
We could be people who are people of light. We could be people who offer hope. We can be people who show love.
Yeah.
We can be different than others. And by the way, there is something pretty amazing about being different in a positive way that does a lot for our soul.
Yeah.
It does a lot for our emotions, and it gives us really something to celebrate, to stand out and to be different.
Yeah. There's a Greek fabulist or storyteller, pretty famous guy named Aesop.
Yes.
You ever heard of Aesop?
Oh yeah.
He has this great quote that says, "No act of kindness, no matter how small, is ever wasted."
That's right.
And I think that's what we're talking about is just step into somebody's life and have one small act of kindness, and you're living out that quote from Fred Rogers.
Exactly right.
You are the helper.
Right. All right. So look, let's just let's figure out what this is all about, and then we'll wrap it up. But here's a challenge I see in all of this, and that is our attention span today has become very short. Like we see a tragedy on the news, the media, we read it, whatever it is, and we're moved by it. And a week later, the media has taken us down another trail about something else, and that sense of need has been removed, and we forget about it. I mean, you brought up the Syrian refugee crisis,
right?
That was the world's largest migration of refugees ever, and we've kind of forgotten about it. But they're still out there, and some of our people are working with them and giving them education and loving them. But the world has moved on and forgotten all about that crisis. And so I think we need to accept that challenge that our attention spans are they're very short, and the problems are very long, and they just don't go away overnight. And so I think for us, like if we're a parent, like how can we help our children see a challenge, a tragedy, an opportunity to be that helper? And then how do we visibly remind them of that by what we put on our refrigerator, or a child in another country that we've, in a sense, adopted across the waters to help feed, to provide for them, or other ways to keep our children sticking with a crisis beyond just the moment. So I think there's a challenge there for us, and that is to make being someone who helps and loves and cares something that's a pattern in our life, not a short-lived moment.
Yeah, exactly. And I love that you brought that up because that's something you and I had discussed. Of like you were talking about the parenting aspect. Like let's raise a generation that acts in this way versus the hostility of the world today, or just getting caught up in the frenzy of the media cycles and feeding the frenzy by our reactions to it, but rather being the helper and looking for the helpers.
Yeah.
So even if it's a big circumstance today, who knows what's going to happen today? Some major thing could happen in the news. And so our encouragement to you would be, look for the helpers.
Right.
Somebody is stepping in to help, despite what you may see on the news, or be afraid, or whatever fear comes your way. There are helpers in the midst. And in some small way, wherever you are and whatever you're doing, find ways to be the helper in whatever situation is in front of you.
Yeah. Hey, I have an illustration just happened yesterday.
Okay.
I didn't plan on sharing this.
Oh, I have one too. Okay, let's share illustrations. Go ahead.
But this is really cool. So I went to a restaurant, and there was a young hostess at the restaurant, 17 years of age. I happen to know her personally. I was sitting outside at the restaurant because it was a beautiful day again here in Colorado. And toward the end of the meal, I looked up, and she was helping a very elderly lady who also had her dog and also had her handful of her takeaway meal. But she was helping her to this lady's car. And And it took quite a while. Like, she's the hostess. She's supposed to be seating people. And yet she helped this woman to her car who was having a very, very bad day. And afterwards I commented, I said, that was absolutely beautiful what you just did.
Wow.
And then I found out later there was a conversation that took place. And this elderly lady said, can you help me to my car? I'm having a bad day. These things are going on in my life. And this young 17-year-old said, I'm sorry to hear about that. Is there any specific way that I can pray for you?
Oh, wow.
And just in that moment, a helper doing that, that which was needed. And so to me, I was like, that's pretty cool. If a 17-year-old can do that, why can't we do something just that simple?
Right.
To look for the helper within me, and what can I do? What can I say to help somebody?
Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah,
I had a moment yesterday that was kind of touching that I thought about, and coming into this recording, I was like, I should mention this little quick story. So, little illustration. My wife has been really sick the last few days. You know that actually because you were texting her.
Yep.
But she's been really sick the last few days. And just yesterday, I was at a lunch meeting, and I got a random text from one of our friends, my wife's really close friend, but a mutual friend. And she texted me and said, hey, I just put some food on your front porch. Can you let Jen, my wife, can you let her know that it's there so she'll take it inside? And I just thought, man, she did not have to do that. But she knew my wife was sick. And so she brought over some traditional soup dishes. For people who don't know, my wife's Korean. This was a Korean friend. Brought over some traditional Korean dishes that you're supposed to eat when you're sick. Helps you feel better. And anyway, I just thought, man, she didn't have to do that.
Right.
And just text her back and just let her know how grateful we were for her. But she saw a small moment. Hey, here's a friend who's sick, a friend in need, and I'm going to go be the helper.
Yeah.
And just as mentally prepping to record this podcast, I thought, that's such a great real world example. Just like your example from the restaurant. Like it's amazing how those moments pop up just moments before we have to record a podcast on that topic.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that's kind of cool. So I would say, as we land this plane, that like, let's not be so busy, so consumed in our own lives that we give up amazing opportunities to do something good and kind for someone else.
Yeah.
It could be a simple text. It can be a word of encouragement. It can be a check-in. It can be a provision of something small.
Yeah.
So let's be that kind of people.
I love it.
All right. This is the June Think Global podcast. And I think what we've talked about is the fact of, in this world, strangers become our friends and friends become family. We encourage you to think that way. We encourage you to live that way. And let's do our part in making our communities and our world a better place.